Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. We appreciate this chance to share our model and maybe provide some information that might be helpful elsewhere and maybe in your communities. You know, as Chief Lawrence mentioned, our county really came together, developing a continuum of services, not only for the treatment aspect, but for the supervision aspect as well, because when you sit back and you look at case management of offenders and recognizing that they're all different, there needs to be the ability to supervise them differently and to direct them into treatment differently. Now currently our probation department, medium-sized county, has roughly 3,000 individuals on formal probation, and we've received 345 post-release community supervision cases since realignment began. And as many of you are aware, when these PRCS cases came to us back in October of 2011, we encountered some challenges. And some of those challenges, like many of you, included looking for additional treatment needs, reentry services, and transitional housing. Transitional housing was a sort of a new concept for us because historically, prior to AB 109, many of our formal cases did a short period of time in custody, and when they got out, they often had a place to go. But with the realignment population, many of them had no place to go. And that was one of our significant challenges that we were working on. Now our goal when receiving these offenders was, like many of you, to do a risk needs assessment, place them on appropriate caseloads based on their supervision level, and provide them with appropriate evidence-based treatment recommendations based on their criminogenic needs. But we decided, as Chief Lawrence mentioned, to focus a little bit differently, not just on the PRCS cases, because we recognize that less than 10% of our population supervised in Placer County are PRCS cases. The majority of them are formal probation felony cases. And we didn't want to overlook that concept, and we felt that overlooking the 3,000 formal felony cases would be overlooking public safety. So we decided, as mentioned previously, to provide services to both the PRCS cases as well as our formal cases. Now our CCP approach in our department changed our role, as mentioned earlier, with the Special Investigations Unit, but it also changed our role within our department. For the first time, probation officers were working more in the adult arena with Health and Human Services. They were working more with SIU because traditionally, prior to the new mission and redesign of SIU, we had a probation officer assigned to the team, but he was primarily just working on case management, the liaison between the probation department and the SIU team, and providing various support duties during their searches and their task force operations. But that changed. We also integrated 2 full-time practitioners, and soon to have 1 more on board here in the next few weeks. They work side by side with our probation officers. So now, rather than sending the probationer down the street to a different building to get an assessment, these practitioners are down the hall. And on many occasions, we've had probation officers doing intake appointments and various appointments, and there was something of concern during that appointment where the probation officer leaves, walks down the hallway, grabs the practitioner, comes back, does a mental health assessment, and before we know it, that offender is on his way to treatment. And that's a very good concept for us. It saves time, and it provides direct, immediate treatment opportunities for the offenders. So expanding our continuum and developing that specialized caseload with the SIU unit, it really provided us the opportunity to, I guess, focus on the individual medium and high-risk offenders, but everybody in this room, I believe, has some problem cases. Those cases that we might call the worst of the worst. The individuals that just are not going to follow the rules, they're not going to comply with conditions, and those are the types of cases that we send to the SIU caseload. We still focus on treatment, we still do evaluations, but we want to have intensive services for that group, and hopefully, like his example was, that they have the ability to follow the directions, get involved in treatment, make positive changes, and hopefully come back to a different level of supervision within our department. Now, the SIU team is also responsible for tracking down all of our PRCS warrants. Any absconded PRCS case gets assigned to the SIU team so they can utilize their law enforcement tools and expertise regarding surveillance and apprehension of offenders. Placer County recognizes that a felon on the run poses a significant public safety risk, not only to our community, but all of your communities as well. So we believe that a future victim is still a victim, regardless of the location where that person lives. So our SIU team has taken the concept, and they will make every effort to track down absconded felons through surveillance and police technology, regardless of their location. We've had numerous cases where the SIU team has tracked down absconded cases out of our jurisdiction, and a couple where they even were able to work jointly with law enforcement agencies in different states, bringing these individuals back to Placer County. Now, our collaborative approach to offender supervision, as Ron mentioned, helps our team understand each other. Bringing in Health and Human Services into our department was a big win for us. We've had some collaborative models in our juvenile system, but this was truly the first concept where we actually brought Health and Human Services staff into our office. But at the same time, these practitioners attend those meetings that Chief Lawrence mentioned regarding case management, discussions on cases, talking about children in the house and families, and they really help craft the case plan and the management of the population. Now, many of these cases that have come through have been assessed by the practitioners, made some positive changes, and are on their way to hopefully a successful life. But as we continue to expand our operations, it's important that we realize when we're talking here today about, I've heard some comments about working together, understanding each other better. One of the biggest things that kind of hit me a few months ago when I was working, I believe I was at the gas pumps putting gas in the car, and I looked over and one of the SIU agents was actually standing there putting gas in his vehicle as well. And he walked up to me and he said, "Chief, how are you doing?" And I said, "Great, well, thank you." And then he looked at me and he said, "You know what? We've been training with your probation officers, and we've been attending these meetings, and your department brings their A game to every meeting." And at that point, I realized that when you talk about relationships and collaboration, respect is not given, it's earned. And when you work together in a collaborative manner, it really does open the eyes to each other, because we have probation officers understanding the role of the SIU agents more. We have practitioners understanding the role of the SIU agents and our probation officers, and together they are learning and crafting new plans to make our community safe. Now, currently, just some numbers for you. We have caseloads of our 75 to 1 probation officer for our high-risk caseloads, doing our best to minimize that so we have more time, so our officers have more time in the field, more time to work with the practitioners and the families and hopefully create positive outcomes. Our PRCS caseloads within the department, we have 35 offenders per 1 officer, again, allowing more time for involvement and interaction. But our Special Investigations Unit has currently 27 high-risk offenders. Once again, the worst of the worst, those individuals that just will not comply with the terms and conditions. And they also have 13 active warrants that they're actively pursuing. Today, currently, we have 147 post-release community supervision cases in our county. Now, when you sit back and you think about parole realignment back in 2011 and what's happened since then, I think it's important to note that there's a balance between supervision and a balance between treatment. And that is really the role of our probation department, is to find that balance and provide appropriate case management and promote public safety in our community. So some of the stats regarding our AB 109 cases and our efforts with our SIU team and our probation officers. Since realignment, we've had over 3,300 unannounced home visits and searches. We've had over 3,800 office appointments. We've had 921 offenders enroll in and successfully complete an evidence-based or educational program. We've also had, given with the treatment and compliance and the direction, we've had 65 of our PRCS cases successfully make it 1 year without returning to custody. And when you sit back and you think about the discussions today, you'll talk about the themes of successful outcomes. We talk about reducing recidivism through the use of evidence-based practices. But I think it's also important to note, going back to my comment about balance, is preventing future crime and preventing future victims. Now, Chief Lawrence's case that he mentioned regarding the case of the PRCS case that changed his life and is hopefully on his way in a correct path. I have another example regarding a potential case that one of those cases that just wasn't following the rules. In our example, this was one of the cases that wasn't a PRCS case. He was a formal probation case, and he was sentenced to 5 years formal probation, and he was a sex offender. That individual came in for his appointment. He provided an address, and of course, like many, he didn't have a phone, and so we attempted to verify the address, and he would call and check in, and he would report another address, and it was very apparent rather quickly that he was doing something that many of us call couch surfing, going from place to place, potentially trying to avoid detection or finding out that he's out of compliance. And so the probation officer decided, you know what, here in Placer County, we have another tool. We have our SIU caseload. We have law enforcement officers that are trained in surveillance and tracking down individuals. So we assigned this person to that caseload. It wasn't long that our SIU agents conducted some extensive research, 2 days of surveillance, and they determined that, yes, it was true. The individual did not give us the appropriate address. In fact, none of the addresses that he gave us were correct. But what they did find out was he actually had a place to live. And he actually had a phone too, believe it or not. And so when they contacted him at his residence and conducted a search, they found out and confirmed a few things. He provided a false address. He failed to register as a sex offender. He lived with young children. He had access to the internet, and he was in possession of a stolen handgun. And that's just one example that when you are dealing with probation cases and they are difficult and very difficult to manage, manipulative, the value of having a collaborative partnership with your law enforcement task force and the ability to utilize their tools and resources, in this case, provided another successful outcome. And that successful outcome was the potential for one less victim, because this was one of those people that would be classified as the worst of the worst and just wasn't following. That individual was convicted of new crimes and his violation of probation and sentenced to the California Department of Corrections. Now, when we sit back and we think about collaboration in our approach, as I mentioned, we take that very seriously and provide all of our resources to our AB 109 offenders as well as our formal cases. Our cases are assessed, receive appropriate services, case plans, and community supervision, because the SIU model really allows us to expand that continuum of supervision while enhancing the continuum of treatment in other areas. Our team approach brings our law enforcement partners together, probation officers, treatment services, providing for risk-based community supervision, evidence-based treatment, and a safer community. Thank you.